Hello, I'm Blake Manuel. I'm the International Vice President for the Air Force Sergeants Association. And joining me today is Chief Master Sergeant Retired Jim Lockovic. Jim, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
One of the questions I'd like to ask you today and that we could discuss is, with the economy dealing with inflation and higher prices, what is AFSA doing to speak on behalf of our members dealing with BAH and pay raises?
First of all, military pay raises, and you will be getting a 4.6% in January. It was announced this morning that the retirees in January are going to get 8.7. That's because their annual cost of living adjustment is based on a different formula in law than is used by active duty. Active duty is based on something called the Employment Cost Index, which measures private sector wage growth. Whereas the retirees are theirs is based on inflation as measured by the Consumer Price Index. In some years, the active duty gets far higher than the retirees, and it just varies from year. This just happens to be 1 year that the economy's in shambles right now, and so inflation is very, very high. One of the big problems that we encountered, to address your question directly, last fall, we had a lot of people got a hold of us and said, got a hold of the association and said, hey, I'm PCSing from this location to this location. There's no base housing available without a long wait. I can't find any place to move my family in that area that I can afford. You know, can we do something about it? And we did two things. We got a hold of both Congress, worked that hard, and got a hold of the Department of Defense, Chief Bass, and mentioned, hey, there are a lot of problems out in the field that we need to address. And in a very short period of time, the Department of Defense preemptively announced, before Congress could force it in a way that they wanted to, announced that 56 different areas around the country were going to get an addition to the BAH that they're receiving, to help compensate for some of the problems in those areas. In the defense bill that was signed back in December, the fiscal year 2022 defense bill, there are a good number of items already signed into law that are looking at how BAH is paid, how military compensation overall is paid. One of the things we're hoping that will happen is that it will become mandatory spending, and that the measurement for the pay raise you get will not be the current 15 months in advance, but it will be 3 months in advance, as is the case with the retiree cost of living adjustments. So there's a very serious look being taken at basic allowance for housing, basic allowance for subsistence, overall compensation. We're going to continue to do that. We have to make sure, and that's one of the things our association does, if legislation tells the Department of Defense that they need to do this, there are times that the Department of Defense will not do them until they're pressed, and it goes back to budget priorities and so forth. And if the items that were in the fiscal year 2022 NDAA are not implemented, we will go to Congress, and instead of them being authorizations, we'll make them mandatory, which means the Department of Defense will have to jump real quick, and they don't like that to happen. So more often than not, what they're going to do is they're going to go ahead and, as soon as they see Congress moving in a direction, they're going to go ahead and act.
Well, I think the important thing you said was the comprehensiveness of some of the things that happen when it's in legislation. Because being a recruiter for the Air Force myself, our leadership team, General Thomas, Chief Master Sergeant Goldstrom, they worked hard to get specific things done for people experiencing a great pay disparity in where they live, but it may only affect 5% of the recruiters out there or less. And so there's only so much we can do within the structure of the Air Force or within our chain of command. And so when we have people across the Air Force, across the nation, talking about the inflation and rising costs, to have it happen at the legislative level that then affects the whole system for every service member of all branches, active duty, guard, and reserve, is so critical. And by being a member of AFSA, it helps our voice be that much louder and have that much more impact on our elected officials, as well as just knowing what's happening out there. And that's one of the things that AFSA tries to do, is to help make you aware of the issues affecting us and our quality of life. Through our chapters, we have 125 chapters across the globe, through government emails that, government relation emails that AFSA sends out, as well as your Facebook pages and websites that our chapters, divisions, and international headquarters has to keep you aware of issues, so that you can take action as both a citizen of the United States, reaching out to your representatives, but also a member of the Air Force Sergeants Association, so that we can affect change at the highest level, so that we can have comprehensive change for
Right.
all members.
Right, and one of the things that that we are working on, and that is not equitable right now, is CONUS COLA. Let's face it, if you're stationed in California, you have a lot more economic challenges than if you're stationed in Utah. In California, you're paying $7 a gallon for gas in some locations, and in Utah, you're not. So simply doing something across the board won't work. And CONUS COLA is only for those that exceed the average mean cost of living by 9% or higher, 109% in other words. But it should be, I don't know why they have that limitation. That's something that we need to address as an association. Even if it's 5%, then it ought to be 5%. And it certainly needs to reflect the areas. But all of those things, if you were to pull up the 2022 defense bill and take a look at it, all of those areas are being addressed right now, thanks to the work that AFSA did on the Hill. And again, you can thank AFSA for doing that, and you're going to see some changes in BAH. You're going to see changes in the formula. You're going to see extra allowances coming in for child care. I think before you see that, you're going to see anything you spend on child care will become pre-tax. And so you won't have to pay taxes on that amount of money. So you're going to see more changes coming about, but AFSA is so engaged in the active duty situation and taking care of them and their families that frankly, the quality of the life of active duty members would be far less beneficial than it would be if we didn't do what we do every day.
Well, thank you, Chief, for explaining what AFSA does in that regard, because I know many members out there and their families just see the rising cost of rent and housing, and they look at BAH and they're just thinking it's not enough, it's not changing fast enough, and something needs to change with that. So it's good to hear that AFSA is doing things to address that preemptively on behalf of all of our members. Thank you for taking the time to answer that question.
My pleasure.